What is up, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad to have you here for another video, and we are going to be doing the mid-year freakout tag. And so I did this one last year and it was super fun. I know I already did a video kind of like my highlights like midway through the reading year, but I wanted to do like the specific tag since I did it last year to kind of like compare and contrast like last year and this year, and just because it's fun and why not. I like having a prompt. So we're gonna do that today, and I'm going to get started with the questions. Okay, if you see me keep looking down, it's because I have my laptop in front of me where I'm gonna be following the question. Okay, so we start off strong with what is the best book that you have read so far in 2022? And I feel like it's too early to tell because we're only 6 months in. We're wrapping up the end of June right now. So I feel like it's hard to say at this point because I usually like to reflect on the end of the year, like my favorites, but I have 3 strong contenders that I'm going to show you guys that are my okay. 2 of these I'm not going to spend a ton of time on because I talked about them in my last video, which is just kind of my reading wrap up, how many books I've read, the genres and things like that. But so the top 3 books I would say my favorite books so far of the year are Malibu Rising, and this is a kind of contemporary historical fiction type book that takes place in the early 80s in Malibu. And this one, again, I detail it more in my other video, but just as a gist, you follow a family, and so it's a group of 4 siblings, and the inner working relationships that they have, how they're all affected by their generational trauma and issues from their parents. One of their parents is famous and abandons them, so that's a pretty big plot of the book, and like how they deal with how it affects their mother and how it affects all of their lives and what they end up going to do. There's a lot of like back and forth timelines in this, and it is phenomenal. The book also has some of my favorite quotes of the year. All right, next up we have a mystery, true murder mystery that is one of my favorites of the year in my top 3, and it is The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. Again, I detailed this one a lot more in my other video, but I tabbed the heck out of this one. Both this one and my Malibu Rising were a part of a book club that I do with my work. So got some really good books this year out of that book club. Highly recommend doing a book club with your friends. It's so much fun. It really gives like good discussion around books and what we love about them. This one really gives a lot of like what I enjoy about reading, which is really putting you in the book. It really is like super engrossing, super atmospheric. You really feel like you're here. It's about this creepy manor where there's a death, and essentially you wake up, without any spoilers, you wake up in another person's body every morning trying to solve this mystery. Or I say every morning, you're reliving the same day through a different person's eyes every like day. So like you go to sleep in one person's body and you wake up in the next person's body. It's very interesting, super unique concept. I think the writing is beautiful. I actually think this is this guy's first book, which is super surprising. And there's a lot of twists and turns. So like just when you think you've got things figured out, you don't have things figured out. So this is like exactly what I want out of a mystery, and I love mysteries. So definitely my top 3. And then we have the beautiful conclusion to the A Court of Thorns and Roses series that I read with my best friend Katie. I have a reading vlog on my channel of this book, but I hadn't finished it yet, so I didn't get to give my thoughts, but definitely in my running for top book of the year. This book, just the way it talks about pain and grief and sorrow and tragedy, the way it affects you and the way like it changes you is super cool. It's a very deep fantasy that deals with so many real life issues, which is why I love this series so much, is because you can have the most fantastical elements, the most unique power system, but it still feels so real and authentic, and I think that's what I really love about this book. Again, tabbed the heck out of this book, got to read it with my best friend, and it has so many beautiful quotes in this book that I will keep with me forever. So this is definitely up there, definitely a contender. Okay, I would say the best sequel that I have read in 2022 is Vow of Thieves, and I'll put it on the screen. It is an audiobook that I read this year. And it was really good. I think I actually enjoyed it more than the first book. So I definitely recommend picking up this series. It's about a thief and a prince. And that's really all I need to say. It's kind of like your classic enemy to lovers, but with a really unique twist on it. And I think that the romance is really good, but the kind of fantasy type kind of larceny type things are pretty interesting as well. So I definitely recommend that series. You can read them pretty quick audiobook wise, and the audiobook's really good. The actors are great. A new release that you haven't read that you want to, definitely The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager is high up on my list of ones I want to read. I believe it just came out this month in June, but I love Riley Sager. I haven't read a book that I didn't like by him, and some of my favorite mysteries and thrillers are by him, so I definitely want to read this one, and it's on my list to read soon. I just can't decide if I want to do audiobook for this one or wait and buy it in person, and I have a ton on my TBR that I need to get to. Also, this one, Gallant by V.E. Schwab, came out recently this year, and I haven't gotten to it yet, but it's high up on my list. This one's really cool. Okay, so the next question is, what release are you most excited for the second half of the year? And it definitely is Stay Awake by Megan Golden, which comes out August 9th. I know that's kind of cheating because like it is the second half of the year, but it's definitely sooner rather than later. But I haven't really looked at a ton of books as far as like later in the year. But this one I know I'm really excited for because I love both books that I've read by Megan Golden, The Escape Room and The Night Swim. I had to look really quick. I was like, wait, what is it called? So yeah, I'm definitely really excited for that. I'll put a picture up on the screen and a brief description, but there's a lot of things that that book I think I'm gonna like. My next one is The Biggest Disappointment, and I feel like I'm gonna get some potential backlash on this because I know a lot of people love it, but I did not like the Final Girl support group. I thought it was way too cheesy and campy and not at all what I was expecting. I thought it was gonna be actually scary and interesting, but I found it to be very underwhelming. So that is disappointing because I love a good horror, I love a good serial killer book too, but I did not like this one at all, and I had high expectations, so that is sad. But I know a lot of people love it, so maybe it's your thing. My biggest surprise was probably this book, which is Once There Were Wolves by Charlotte McGonaghy. I really enjoyed this one. I had heard not really anything about it, and I was really surprised by it. It has more contemporary elements, but also like there's a mystery that goes on alongside the other elements that you're kind of diving into. These two sisters that are just going through life, and one of them is like a conservationalist that is reintroducing wolves into Scotland, and they're kind of dealing with their parents are separated, and Inti, which is the main character, has a very rare and interesting disorder where if she sees pain inflicted that she feels that pain, whether it be on an animal or a person. So that plays into some interesting things that happen on later in the book. But I was very surprised by this because I loved it and ended up giving it 5 stars, and I had heard nothing about it. I picked it as my book of the month pick one month, and it really blew me away. So that's probably my biggest surprise. Okay, I don't really have one for new favorite author because I feel like I haven't consistently read books from one author this year that I have loved. So I mean, I'm not really sure there. I probably, you know, Malibu Rising is written by Taylor Jenkins Reid, which is a really popular author who I've only read Malibu Rising and The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, which was also really good. I read that last year in audiobook. So maybe Taylor Jenkins Reid has kind of solidified I really like her writing. So maybe that one would be my favorite one so far. I can't really say for sure yet though. Okay, so your newest fictional crush. Well, obviously I read A Court of Silver Flames, so Cassian is up there. He's just a wonderful man. And I did not know a lot about him and learned a lot about him in this last book, A Court of Silver Flames, so Cassian is up there. And I also just started Crescent City, the first book, A House of Earth and Blood. I'm about 25% way through and I'm obsessed with Hunt. I think he's beautiful and a very nice man with a troubled past. They get us, you know. Okay, for a favorite character, I have a couple of choices because this is really hard. So I think one of them has to be from Under the Whispering Door, Hugo, who's like the owner of the tea shop, which is kind of like the form of, this is not a spoiler, but like the purgatory essentially of this book. Hugo is really, really sweet and is just like such a good staple character and does a lot of good things to help people. So I think that Hugo is a really big one from Under the Whispering Door. And then, I know I keep talking about A Court of Silver Flames, but it's one of my favorites this year. So Nesta from A Court in Silver Flames. I was not a Nesta fan before, and I know that's also kind of a hot take, but this book really made me think of her as like one of my favorite characters from this series now. So can't go without mentioning her. And then we also have from Malibu Rising, which again, gotta mention that one. Nina, who's the oldest sibling, I really resonated with her and had a lot of similarities to her, so I can't help but like pick her because now she had some things about her that weren't great, but I feel like that's what makes her relatable, so I definitely think Nina as well. Ooh, book that made me cry. Okay. 2 books that made me cry this year that I can think of. Under the Whispering Door, cried like a baby. It talks a lot about death, talks a lot about hard things. The ending is beautiful, so I happy cried and sad cried at that book. Second book that I cried is the one I just finished for our book club, The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. I cried a lot of tears because this book is very difficult to read and has happy moments and sad moments, mainly sad ones, so I also cried during that one. But it's one of the best books too, and I highly recommend you read it. Books that made you happy. Well, reading in general makes me happy, so that's hard, but a lot of these books I've read are not necessarily happy books, so it's kind of hard to say. The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle makes me happy because it's just so good and like has so many elements that I love in reading. It reminds me why I love to read. Another one that made me happy was The Maid by Nita Prose. I'll put a picture up of that. That's another classic mystery that gave me everything that I wanted, and had a lot of really cool stuff in that book. It's about a maid who finds a dead body in the hotel that she cleans, and you kind of like unravel that as she goes on, and so it's also really good. I would recommend that as well if you like mysteries. Favorite review you've written this year? I'm kind of behind in my reviews. I have started a book journal, which I showed in my last video. So I think that like overall, I've just been impressed that I've kind of kept up with my book journal this year. So that's probably what I'm gonna go with as far as my favorite thing that I've done. Most beautiful book you've bought this year. Ooh. If we're talking about like beautiful covers, I think this book that I showed earlier is really beautiful. I think it's very interesting, and I don't know, I just love this cover and everything. Then of course, The Vanishing Half. I think this cover is super cool, with the 2 faces and the abstract. So I think this is also one of the most beautiful books I've bought this year. What do you really need to read by the end of this year? I need to make like another TBR video. I have a TBR video that I made towards the beginning of the year. So all of those are still on my list, but I really want to read more of my book of the month books this year. So because all the ones I've read, I've really enjoyed. So let me grab a couple. Okay, just a couple. I have so many I want to read this year, but this was also my first TBR. I really want to read the next book in the Six of Crows series, so Crooked Kingdom. I really want to get to this one. It's bigger, but I absolutely loved the first book. It's one of my favorite books of all time, so I definitely want to get to this one. It's a book that my therapist actually told me to read, but it is A Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. This is a book about a gentleman who was in a Nazi death camp, and kind of he survived in his enlightenment on life and everything. So I definitely want to read this so I can get back to her and actually tell her that I read it and did my homework. Okay, next, I really have wanted to get to this one. It's called The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. This is by the person who wrote The Night Circus, which I really enjoyed, and the description just sounds lovely and like everything I would like out of a book. It is a book about books, which I always enjoy, and it seems like a really good fantasy romance type, really interesting, and the cover's beautiful also. I didn't buy this year, so I didn't include that in my most beautiful books that I bought this year. And I have a couple of 2 more, and I realize most of these are fantasy, but that's kind of what was like closest to me to grab. But I need to read the 3rd and final rendition of the Clash of Kingdoms books. Also one of my favorite series of all time, super interesting. You follow in the first book, which is Ever the Brave, and there's Ever the Hunted, and then Once a King is the final book. It follows your main character, who is kind of like a hunter's daughter whose dad is murdered by who she thought was her best friend. And you go on a journey to kind of like hunt him down, and you learn a lot of things along the way. Is it true? Is it not true? Why would they do that? Enemies to lovers and more. Friends to no, that's a friends to enemies to lover. Best friends to enemies to lovers. So there's some other elements in there for sure that I will not disclose. But I gotta finish this one. Okay, lastly, I need to finish the current book that I'm reading, the first Crescent City book, and then I want to get to the second one as well because I am enjoying it. I'm gonna be honest, I'm not enjoying it as much as A Court of Thorns and Roses, which is by the same author, Sarah J. Maas. But I'm gonna continue to give it a shot, and plus like these covers are pretty cool, and like the inside covers are really cool, so I'm sold. All right guys, that is all I have for this video. Thank you so much for joining. I would love to hear any of your favorite books that you've read this year, your biggest surprises and your biggest disappointments. I want to hear about them all in the comments below, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.